like Kurt.
I love you, Dr. Brad. How are you?
Here we are again. I'm doing quite well, but I did this. I'm very mad at administrators.
Oh, that's not surprising.
I know it's like this. So
They add no value.
they imposed a new electronic record on my online service. And I did the math today, in fact, just before we got on, because I've been using the system for now, 3 days. And it cost me, the utilization of the system has documented to have cost me $48 an hour.
Wow.
And it's like this. Well, the fact that I keep the records is sufficient to, now I can generate a response.
Yes.
Because it's like, that's a significant fragment of, it's 23% of the take of what I've been making the rest of the month. And it's from, since I initiated the use of this system, which is like, okay, this is, and it doesn't add any, in fact, it detracts value from my work, because it's like, it takes more time, and it makes it harder for me to find the information I'm looking for that is of use to treat the patient.
So why do they think it's good?
Because they're administrators.
Oh, no, I didn't. That's obvious.
That's the only answer, though. There's no better answer, because it's beyond comprehension to me, sir.
Well, I have had a hospital as a not bad one, a customer for a long time. And this happens because when you're a CEO in a company like mine, right, which eventually is employed at the time something like a third of all technology people in the Northwest at one point or another, you develop relationships with people who eventually mature into jobs where you have, right. There's a very good hospital I'm talking about, with competent people.
Right.
How decisions are made in that hospital, and realize I've also done work on things like Coumadin and implantable heart devices. I mean, I've touched a lot of industries, right, in some depth. And what I found in the medical industry is that the doctors have some influence, but not
Diminishing. Oh my.
And if you look at who's really now, you've said this better than I have, because I tend to see it from the vantage point I have, which is someone who's trying to help organizations like hospitals, research organizations. I had very little to do with Coumadin, other than my work ended up being an audit to make sure it was going the right direction, right? Whereas in some places I came up with the whole field trials software, which isn't really that hard. It's more excuse me, I just want to say that, doing something today versus doing something in the 90s is a very big difference versus doing it in the 80s, 90s,
Oh yeah.
or today. So there was a point where we were the first people to do some of these things, right? And so you watch it, so you get to see how industries evolve. Anyway, so what I noticed with working with the hospital in particular, this one I got pretty deep into, is that there is like a board, right, for the hospital, right? And they seem to be mostly concerned about insurers, right? There is some leadership that really is trying to make the hospital more successful. That's the entrepreneurial side of it. And some hospitals are really good. I mean, they attract good customers. They offer a great service. That one I'm thinking of is especially known for their natal care, right? Their childbirth or whatever. It's not a ritzy hospital, but it's well above average, right? So, for affluent folks. So, and then you get in there and it's like, well, the doctors want this, but the compromises the IT group has to make, because they have no authority, right? They probably know the right answer unless they've been corrupted too, right? Which happens. But there's probably somebody in IT that says, this is a really bad fucking idea, but I can't win the argument. And in other places, of course, you get IT that's a resistor to change, right? Or in other places, in some places, you get the IT that's an advocate of positive change. So you can't make a universal observation other than this process doesn't work well in the medical industry, and it doesn't because there's too many powerful competing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like just like the government, and that the people's interests are never met by no matter the Democratic vote. There's a negative correlation between what the customers want in the market, the people want in a hospital, the customers want from a hospital, and the citizens want from the government. There's a negative correlation between what the customers want, and the interests of the various parties contributing capital. So what I noticed was, the second thing I noticed was, there's some dumb fucking doctors, right?
Yes,
And there's some, and I don't mean they're dumb like they're mentally incompetent. I mean they're just ignorant of sufficient spectrum of knowledge.
That's right. They're narrowly focused in
they're too narrowly focused.
Yep.
And so you get you get the guy who's a surgeon who's an ego freak, but the truth is he's actually that fucking good.
And he's right.
He's right? I mean, so,
sorry.
And then you get the political activist doctor who's actually profoundly incompetent, but he's loud. Right? So you have this. So this is what bothers me about, so the lesson we learned from Xerox PARC is that the minute anybody has control other than the engineers, it's a fucking disaster waiting to happen. Well, a hospital is my same argument. The minute it's other than doctors who are in control. Why? Because there are doctors who are really fucking good, right? Yep. And when they say Joe's a fucking moron, don't listen to him, that's who you listen to, right? I mean, that's it, right? So why do we have all these other people? And the answer is that it's the presumption of profit when actually the regulatory infrastructure is what's causing a lack of profit, because they try to save a nickel. Right.
Now, I had a meeting with the CEO this week as they renegotiate my contract, which they discovered had elapsed in March. Okay. They're like, oh, we want to rectify this. I'm like, oh, okay. That's fine. All 9 months later is fine. And so I told the CEO, I was sitting with him in the clinical chief, and it's like this. It's like I said, I do appreciate your philosophy, your operating philosophy for how to make the hospital go, which is the general system, the financial economic system is collapsing around our ears, and this is unavoidable.
Yes.
That it is necessarily bankrupt. And it's just a matter of time before that bankruptcy catches us.
Right.
And he goes, I said, I do appreciate your philosophy, which is don't be the slowest hospital.
Yes.
Just be faster than the slower hospitals. And when enough of them are bankrupt, the system will be reorganized.
Did he
That's
appreciate
the operating philosophy? And I'm like, oh, that's a hell of a way to organize, but I honestly can't think of a better way.
Better one. No, it's actually really good. Was he appreciative?
Yeah, he is. He understands. I've known that fellow since we got here 16 years ago, before he was the CEO. He was the CFO at the time. And it's like, and he's doing a good job. And it's like, hospital's doing well, but it's just watching the house of cards collapsing around your ears and trying not to get hit by pieces of falling sky.
So anyway.
So that's where we're at. And so I was talking to you before we started our recording, because I'm interested in organizing the local fellows. And that's just the stand-up guys with no particular skills, right? And it turns out the guys that are of my age, roughly, they call them, I don't remember what they call them. They're not boomers. They're not the late boomers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm the same. We call it in my generation has a name called the Jones generation.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
so
what I'm thinking of. And so it's like these guys are Joneses, and they're like they feel a profound responsibility for management of the change of the guard.
yes,
And so it's like, okay. So I'm like, okay, and they want to organize, and I'm like, okay. So I'm like, okay, I figured out they'll stand up and perform if asked something reasonable.
yes,
And they feel very responsible for this disaster that we are befallen by. And I'm like, okay, I'm interested in organizing a response to the so-called vaccine mandates, because it's like this is offensive to me, because they're using coercion on people that are young people that don't have any means, they need their job, and they're making them do things that are questionably in an ethical stance to take experimental therapeutics into their body without proper anything. And I'm like, okay, so I'm interested in organizing that response, and I want to find out why exactly the institutions that are doing this, and like official reason, you know what I mean?
oh, we know. Well, I mean, go ahead.
But it's the purpose is to cause them to put it on paper
Correct.
as testimony, and then we can go towards the ultimate source with an appropriate response. And the purpose of it is to organize the fellows as much as to generate the research.
Okay, so the problem is at the highest levels quite profound, right? Which is, where did caretaking overtake caretaking of the weak, the less able in society, and comforting them, overtake the responsibility for telling people the truth so they can make adequate decisions? And this feminization of politics is this conversion from paternal adulting to maternal infantilization. That's the question, right? How did that happen? Because we see it most in, of course, democratic or feminine government, rather versus masculine or Republican government. We see it more there. But I mean, it's become, why did Republicans get on board with it? You know, because I can understand why you would say, here's what I envision people saying. In other words, how would I? Well, if they would say, well, we need to make sure that this skepticism doesn't get out of hand and prevent people who are at the margins, who are the vulnerable. Because remember, this turned out to be an obese, old, and black people disease at the very beginning, right? So they saw this as a disease of the margins. And they wanted to say, well, we've got to get everybody on this, and we've got to generate social proof. So if I try to think optimistic, in other words, I get beat up
overly
generously, right?
Which offends me, by the way. Just so
I know,
the audience.
but
Kurt's generosity offends me, everybody. Wait, and since I don't know, but hit like and subscribe, because this is fun. Don't forget to leave your comments.
And it's really bothering me, because this conspiracy shit has turned out to largely be true.
Right. I wish they weren't right. Damn.
But I have my job, right? My job is to be able to testify, so I can't, right? So I have to understand both sides of the argument and say, okay, well, there's absolutely positively a moral conspiracy in there. In other words, people believe that some part of these people are believing that there's a moral, they're doing They're generating a moral conspiracy for the common good because that's what women do. That's what women do to their children. That's what women do to their friends. That's what women do to their husbands. They create stories to ameliorate anxiety and preserve harm. Right? So the feminine intuition does storytelling, in other words, lying, when they believe it's for a moral good. Mothers lie to their kids all the time when they believe it's for a moral good.
Wait, they invented the term white lie, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. So when you get down to this, okay, well, there is a group of people, and I don't blame them for their intuition. I blame us for not saying, you know, that means that you get to talk to those people truthfully with that story. But it doesn't mean that those of us who are like, that's an mRNA thing, and that doesn't work that way. You haven't tested long enough to warranty it. You're telling us all this other stuff doesn't work when it looks like it does, and you're telling us masks work when it looks like it doesn't, and you're telling us all these things that are false, which means you're depriving the adults of their choice, and in order to save the margins from their, and the reason you're doing it is because you're afraid to say the truth, which is, we're afraid you people who are in this category, who are higher risk, you need to be sure that you're vaccinated because it gives you help, maybe gives you help. But realistically, this disease isn't that serious, right? It's basically a severe flu. And if you're not comorbid, it's not going to be a problem. But there were all these, there were all these incentives to tank the economy, to tank the president, right? To seize more power, for the CDC and the WHO to get more money and attention and influence. There's all these malincentives out there, but there was no justice, judicial department, to bring this before, because there was no, like we're doing, there's no way to articulate in this time and space who was committing what crime for what reason because of all the confusion. So where did we go from masculine truth telling to parental wisdom telling to feminine storytelling? How did that fucking happen? Well, it happened by the introgression of women into the healthcare business.
No, yeah, to the polity, right?
Did I make that? Did I make the case there?
I think so.
Okay.
And it's like, well, what's interesting is I keep on picking up more vibe about this. That signal is increasing in resonance in the general conversation. It's becoming more widely understood and understandable.
Well, which makes sure
the introjection of feminine intuition into the polity has become problematic.
Yes.
Or is related to the current situation in some fashion that is being discussed in a more broad sense as we speak. So it's widening out in the general conversation. Now I gotta ask this question because it seems like this is episode 2110. Because you had a staff meeting, yeah?
I don't really know what number.
On Thursday?
I can't, well, the other stuff doesn't have to be in perfect order.
Oh.
So let's say this is, 2110 looks right.
Sorry.
Don't be. It's my fault. I published 8, and now I've got like 5 more, and I don't know.
All kind of things are going to happen, kids. Don't expect the numbers to match up. That would be just silly.
No, I mean, Jesus. It's more that I'm not sure if I'm going to publish all of them.
That's okay too.
That's because the stuff Brand and I are working on in activism, some of that looks like it. I thought originally it shouldn't be published, but I think it actually should be. So I might publish that stuff too. So, and I just think the content production from our side is going to accelerate over the next, because you're going to do, I mean, we're starting to branch out. But anyway, I don't want to take away from your
My rant.
well,
I'm
your
not really ranting.
well, the wisdom you're departing.
Oh, that's very kind. So that's it. So I just that's where I'm at. I'm just starting to organize my thinking towards these ends.
Give me 1 second. I'm trying to get back. I can't find you. There we go. Say that again.
I'm lost. Here I am.
No, it's just I've got a fucking 100 windows open, and some of the windows have 40 tabs, and I'm like, oh, okay, where are you?
Only some of them?
That's
why we have this.
Yeah. I have this wonderful plugin that keeps track of all my tabs. So
really,
if it crashes, I can restore my previous
God
state.
forbid.
Well, it happens, right? Because I have like right now, when I started filling this up, I clearly had no memory available. And so when I started filming, when I turned on Zoom, it sort of
it went whoa.
So, which is the one thing, one reason I want to upgrade from my favorite laptop to the new Apple M1 chip is just so I can have the video processing is lower demand on the computer. Anyway, so I just distracted you again. You were saying something, and I want you to repeat it.
About what? Which you would like me to repeat?
The thing you said was before I rudely interrupted.
Oh no, we're doing fine. The
Okay.
It's like what I said was I noticed that the discourse, the general public discourse, is picking up the signal that the introjection of the feminine cognitive style,
yes,
which Enriquez would relate to the Enlightenment gap somehow, is related to this, to the problem. And the signal is picking up in the general discourse. And I'm I had a very interesting conversation with a nice lady who moved to my town from New Jersey 3 months ago. And so I don't know her from anybody.
That's a weird relocation.
Oh yeah, that's what I said. I said, how did you end
urban New Jersey to a mining town in Arizona?
No, she's not, but she's from rural New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
Southern. So I talked to her about it, and I said, look, I was able to explain our conversations in brief, in less than 20 minutes. And she was in agreement. She understood what I was talking about, and she was in agreement with the basic theses and the conclusions that were drawn. And I was very impressed that I could articulate it and that she could understand it and she would agree with it. And it's because it's not that hard. But it takes a special class of mind. What's that?
Once you understand, it's not that hard.
Because it's interesting, because I broke it down from the problem with the Constitution to the introjection of the feminine cognitive processing into the polity, and not a step was lost along the way. And it, it's because those are fairly big leaps in terms of how long it took me. 52.
Yeah, that helps. The thing is, you need life experience to know we're right. That's one of the things we're figuring out is that.
Oh, because it's a 21-year-old co-ed is not going to want to understand.
Well, one of that is that they have all their information from social discourse rather than demonstrated evidence of working with people in life, like in the workforce and whatever. So if you're in this this reality distortion field we call the high school and the academy, right? It's this amazing reality distortion field. And you grow up in that, then you're going to carry the reality distortion field along with you until you get to the point where it can't survive scrutiny. Then we get people like member of your certain family that that enter into fields
yes,
that
sir.
are with other people sharing the same reality distortion field. And then they don't learn to get out of it. Whereas one of the things that I like about working class people is
They're just banging it out with the wrenches, man.
well, and they see real, they interact with real people, not essentially a priesthood.
There's no theory
There's no theory there. It's just I'm working for
that doesn't turn the wrench.
So you know, but the reality distortion field is something that who's the CEO of Microsoft?
Gates?
No.
Oh, the new CEO. I'm sorry.
I can't bring it up right now. Anyway, he said, "Now, Kurt, if I get outside of your reality distortion field,"
Uh-oh.
he was just teasing. His lawyers with him, or whatever it is. I took it as a huge compliment that I could make a pitch that effective to somebody that sophisticated, and he would come back with this bit of humor, which is
right.
Something I respect. But, anyway, he's a really good guy. I love Gates. I understood Balmer, but he wasn't good. But Sanjay is his name. He's really quite good. I'm very proud of what he's done for that company. Anyway, how did I get there? Oh, you talked to a woman. So the point is, but the thing is, you can create a narrative now that people can understand. How many narratives? In other words, this is interesting. So she's in her 50s, so she's got life experience. So if we were to make a demo, this is what we do with technology, right, or marketing, is we say, who are the ideal customers? Who are the archetypes that we're trying to meet? And we make personality profiles for them, and say, how do I reach this person? You think you'd be surprised at how analytical the process of marketing and user interface design and all this other stuff are, but it's really, at least the way I do it, it's pretty analytical. Right? So I do it and I teach it. So how many personalities, in other words, I don't think the number of stories, and we've discussed this before, that was a story you could reach her with. I don't think there are too many fundamental stories to tell. I mean, that's the basic one, right?
Simple.
I could go back with Enriquez and take it back further and talk about how the English empirical, the French feminine counter reaction, the German attempted synthesis. I can go back and talk to Enriquez about that, and then go to the argument about the Industrial Revolution and what it caused, the integration of women, and the problem with the constitutional law. Right? I mean, you could. Right. So but what's so I could there's only so right, and I could go back and say, well, you know, there's civilizations only have so many choices. I'm trying to go back to the art. Right. And civilizations have only so many choices, and since all differences are male and female, they're going to end up in this ternary.
Which is a ridiculous, like that one is the most ridiculous thing ever. It's like the consciousness basically breaks into those two fragments, and it's just like, that's a peculiarity that I really would have a hard time to explain, because it's like, it just has to do with distributions in the population.
That's it.
It's all
it also appears to have something to do with the Africa, Middle East, India,
which is like it's like
Europe. There's something to do with the progression. And then the conflict that results during agrarianism, and the need to solve that during the age of.
To me, it's like a brain developmental analog.
But that was the next one, right? We go back to the brains, and then we explain this whole thing as brains, right? Getting back. So when I said there's only so many stories.
But if you look at it like this, if you look at the map of Europe, Africa, Eurasia, okay, as analog to a picture of a brain looking to the left. Okay? So
Brain-
caudal rostral development.
Yeah, I got it. I got it.
It's caudal rostral development in that pattern.
Oh, wow, that was fucking brilliant. I don't know if I did that before. I don't think I did that before.
I did it just for you, Kurt.
I didn't do that before. That was really fucking smart. It's actually true.
It's,
Oh, that's depressing. Why is it? Why do these things depress me? You do this. You love rubbing it in.
Life is good, Kurt.
There's a part of me that's beginning to realize that I've always been critical of myself for being this hyper analytical guy. And then I deal with you guys who basically tease me about my emotionality. Which and the irony of that is just so weird.
It's just stupid. It's just stupid. It's like so you're so upset by your hyper analytical thing. You're sentimental about it.
Yeah, I'm a pretty sentimental guy, and so over my life, I'm like considered the dry, ruthless Darth Vader, thing for my whole life. And then I deal with you fucking guys, and it turns out that I'm like a emotional namby.
You're the nice guy.
You guys. I'm the nice guy. So weird.
We're like comic relief for your life, Kurt.
I think I'm comic relief for you fuckers.
Yeah, there you go.
So anyway, where we were on, you just were saying something very
Africa, Eurasia, caudal rostral developmental arc.
Yep.
Brain looking to the left.
Well, that's how it had to happen, right? Yeah. It's just an evolution.
Yes.
You know what I'm working on right now is this morning is I'm testing Piaget's argument along the same lines about this is the cognitive superiority of just superior, what is it called? The superior cognitive something of Europeans. And it's like his whole argument is, well, we vastly underestimate the difference in thinking between Europeans and others because there's been such a feminine movement. And he lists all the feminine thinkers like Durkheim and Claude Levi-Strauss. They're all Jews. Such a feminine movement to justify universalism that doesn't exist. Right? It's projection. They're all doing all these Jewish thinkers.
It's a statement of bias.
Projection. Well, it's feminine projection, but yeah. Well, I mean, it's unconscious bias, right? I mean, they're just using feminine projection that their bias is a universal, just like all females do, which is why I'm like Jewish cognition. It's got to be biological because it so perfectly matches. Even if it's obviously stronger if you're like Piaget and Durkheim, whose parents or grandparents are rabbis, right? I mean, these people are really indoctrinated in the Jewish intellectual tradition. And so they're projecting, I don't know if it's entirely cultural, if it's partly biological, but it doesn't really, well, it matters in the sense that it seems to persist as they outmarry. In other words, it seems to persist across generations. So you can still detect the Jewish Europe versus or the feminine versus masculine European in 3 generations.
Right.
So is that cultural or I don't know. Well, and the reason you could say it's the same because moral tradition among Europeans still maintains, even though there's no biological difference between these Europeans really. What's the real difference appears to be is just what moral transfer is happening between parents and child. I mean, there's such a continuity of the four waves of the sons of Albion or whatever it is, the waves of Europeans and especially Anglos. But but then I go, okay, well, I'll push back on the idea that those were just moral variations because those variations are actually class structures. And so class structures tend to be genetic. So isn't it genetic also? So
it's like this, the brain genetics is so complex that, you think about the wiring of the brain
Yeah, it's fucking.
And it's like we may never be able to untangle the complexity of associated with. There may be a genetic basis for moral wiring that we will not detect.
I'm sure there is. Absolutely, there's.
It seems likely.
Well, but what Piaget,
Sure.
but what Piaget was saying is, you know, the difference between a Middle Easterner or an African or even an Asian and a European is far greater than we think. He's saying, as I advocate, yeah, but we just invented the shit, right? Because we're the newest race and the newest civilization. So, like as you just described, I mean, we're benefiting from being the last mover, right? I mean, so we have a demographic composition that's superior because of geography and whatever. We're the newest race and the newest civilization, and we inherited. You know, we got lucky, and when we evolved on the steppe, that came at the time where the Middle East had already evolved all these technologies, and we could look.
They were ossifying.
They were ossifying, and we were saying, we have an advantage by this, right? I mean, they weren't thinking of it rationally; they were just doing it because it was obvious, right? And so they maintained that advantage. So, I mean, I'd expect, you know, what's disturbing is your correct mirroring of the brain thing. I'm just, kind of, my head's going to explode.
Sorry, Kurt.
But
not really, not at all. Actually, none.
You're never sorry.
No sorrow at all. It's absolutely dry.
But I'm having, you guys are
sorry, Kurt.
Anyway, so what he's saying is that everybody can learn it, and I'm like, well, I don't. If you transplant somebody out, like if you take a kid from his parents and you transplant them into a European, there still seems to be some. You can still. It's pretty hard.
That's a debatable issue.
Right.
Because it's like suggestion of the tabula rasa, which is likely to be falsified.
It is false. Well, we know it's false. The question is, you brought up earlier, it's very complex up there, right? So, you know, we don't, you know, it's one of those things where a small difference in neural plasticity or neural bias in large numbers produces a vast difference in demonstrated behavior, right? I mean, it's like the argument between men and women. Are we really that different? Well, I
noticed the difference.
Yes.
And I will probably always notice the difference.
Yes.
And I will not be confused.
No. But the point is that if your bias is not to notice differences, it's to notice similarities, then you end up with a female. And it's just fucking insane how that little difference can have that profound an effect. Or as we see in the Jewish people, it looks like they've been selecting for female traits in males. In other words, detail, verbal, right, precision, shopping, right, negotiation, non-aggression. If they've been do that through a couple of bottlenecks, well, I mean, and if you start out with Africans are already very dimorphic physically. In other words, but if you look at the minor difference between African and other populations and personality distribution, it's a slight bias to feminine prosociality.
Huh.
And so, and then we've known that about the feminine prosociality of the Middle East since the time of the Greeks. The Greeks called them liars, right? The way I call women liars, right? Are they really lying? Or are they prevaricating?
Right.
Right. It's
lying is such strong terminology. It's like,
when I first came out with this, well, you're just lying because under tort, it doesn't matter if you intended or not. People I think, pushed back on me on that when we first started talking. I can't quite remember it, but I can sort of envision you saying
what is it that was this?
I try to tell people, well, they're saying that's not lying because you didn't intend to.
Oh, right.
Court doesn't care if you intend to. It's your fit. You think it's a positive aspect of it, versus
like a via positiva thing,
right? Versus a negativa due diligence to ensure you're not. right? So you don't, and so what happens there is plausible deniability. I can say, well, I believed it, but you didn't do due diligence against not spreading a lie. So that was, and that's largely what women do, right? It's evasion of responsibility for due diligence in order to evade the responsibility of conflict management, by instead of telling stories that ameliorate differences, right? That
Ameliorate, it's solved for emotional consistency.
for consistency instead of external correspondence.
Right.
External correspondence, which is the same, which is external consistency.
I'm like, we called, notably related to the construct of truth.
Yes. It's so funny when you see it, like, and the more you work on it, like you say, you see it now. Like I'm in the place where I can't unsee it anywhere, even if I try.
I'm sorry. That's
It's just
irritating.
so bad, and it's like, well, you're just being a woman, and you can't say that today because it's just true, right? But because they can't even tell the difference between desirable and true, right? It can't be true if it's undesirable. That can't be true, right?
It's a denial
What?
function must occur. A denial function must occur.
Right. And because they don't want to, any attempt to cause a woman to bear responsibility will provoke her fight and flight response. And yeah, I mean, there's an argument whether there's a 20% overlap or 40% overlap, just like there's the argument of nature versus nurture. In my case, it looks like 80 and 20 idiosyncratic, right? Just random association of neuroplasticity, right? And then and to some people it looks like 60%, right?
Like
Yeah,
potato, man.
Yeah, well, it's still. I'm like, I just think the more you look at it, the more genetic it is, right? Because you realize it's structural, and then you look at twin studies, and it's like it's just genetic. It's all it is, right? It's genetic, and the rest is idiosyncratic. One meaning that
there was an interesting case that came up this week. I saw this: 2 medical students, right? They're twins, and they got busted for cheating because their answers were so similar, and they were exonerated because it's like, oh, we're about the same. So our answers are going to be very similar.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool because it's like, you must be cheating because your answers are so similar. It's like, no, we're almost identical. That was funny to me. That was kind of unbelievable to me that it even came up as a case and they were able to adjudicate it. Right? Just funny. What next?
A great example is, of course, I overplay my autism, ADD, OCD.
Yes.
But when I was in school, I have no problem figuring anything out. It was easy, but it was memory, right?
Okay.
So I can't willfully memorize things. They either fit together or they don't. Does that make sense?
Oh, so the things that are like random things to remember is hard.
I can't do it. I have to have some organization to it, or I can't remember it.
Right.
So, somebody brought up the other day, one of the most useful things you can have in the world is to memorize your timetables. So you don't.
That's right.
Well, I used to make these little timetables cards, right? And I charged $1 for them.
Okay.
And by the time I was done with 5th grade, everyone had one taped to the corner because I taped it to the corner of my desk, right? But I wouldn't have been able to I wouldn't have so easily remembered them without the structure.
Right.
Does that make sense?
So this is interesting because I was in organic chemistry. After I got out of college, I had to take organic chemistry, and I loved it because it's so easy. It's just, you do this, you get that. You do this, you get that. You do this, you get that. But it's like, so we're doing these things, and every time you get this series of things that you must memorize to understand, to know what's going to happen. And I would do that, and I would remember it, and then I would get an A. And
Yeah.
then I remember I studied all of the ones previous and the next one, and then I would get an A. But then the chain got to be so big
Yes,
that
yes,
it's like I got less than an A, and I'm like, whoa, I'm so totally not studying for this correctly. So I said,
yes.
study the last block and you forget all the rest of it because the
That's what
last
matters.
block is all he cares about right now.
Yes,
And
yes.
I got my A. But I was
Yes.
like, because it's the forest is too big. There's too
Yes.
many trees to remember.
For me, I have to know the system to understand the parts. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
that's why I would always read the textbook as soon as we got it. I'd read the whole fucking thing. Right? Because like this incremental uncertainty,
Because I don't know what's going to happen. This is
I don't
not
like it. I can't, I'm like, how does that fit into anything? And so they're trying to give you this step by step. And I'm like, tell me the fucking story that I have something idea what the plot is. Right. And I had no way to tell them that. Right. So I would just,
no, because you couldn't even articulate it.
I couldn't even explain it. I'm like, so I just read the fucking book, the whole thing, you know, with, and so some degree, I mean, I just coasted the rest of the year. Right. But
Right?
once you understand the plot,
The story becomes easy to understand.
yeah, then all the pieces fit into the plot. But you know, I remember them going over proofs, mathematical proofs, and I'm trying to get out of somebody explain why. Like, whereas they should have been able to explain to us why a proof matters
That seems reasonable, doesn't it?
or what number. You know what I mean? It's just like the lack of, like, we just went over a great example, and we want to go back to it, which is the constitutional problem, the
Yep.
industrial revolution problem, the enlightenment problem, the religion problem, right? The axial age problem, right, et cetera. Then we get to the differences, the order of which you came out, which is lovely, the order of evolution of civilizations, sort of mirroring cognitive development, and then cognition itself and how the brain works in neural economy and the sex, right? It's not an infinite number of stories.
It's very short.
Right. But it's actually, you actually have to tell the whole story. Right. And
You have to, it's like, it's the same as your book, right? It's like, okay, you need to know the arc of the story, and then all the pieces fit together.
Yes. If you understand the basic story, it's okay. But I mean, if you start with different cognitive neural economy and you try to thoroughly explain that, and then you go to civil cooperative, I mean, it's a lot of tricks. But if you start with, here's the problem of modernity, and you do what you did, which is work backwards, right? All of a sudden, you've anchored the individual in a problem of reality that he's currently understands, right? And so that's what we do with the introduction, right? Let's just ground this in something that's perceivable by you and tell a story, and then let's go prove it, right? Which is the whole struggle I've been having, as I was having, which is, how do I tell this fuck? I mean,
Complex.
it's just too much. I mean, and yet I'm like, fuck, I'll lose. I watch people's eyes glaze over, right? So there's like no way, right? How can we do it? But you can do it now because you started. You started with perceivable reality, right? And you worked to abstractions. Whereas my intuition is to work for first principles up to the case of reality. But that is like asking somebody,
the opposite of human experience,
right? It's asking people to hold their breath underwater, right? Until you get there. It's just completely ridiculous. But anyway, so I wanted to, if it's okay, if you don't have anything, I wanted to take you back to your comment with the woman, right?
Yes.
Which is that you could explain it, right?
I was impressed that I could do it so rapidly.
Now,
it's fairly simple.
Okay, so how do we reach the other end of the spectrum, which is the 20-year-old girl who has been indoctrinated?
Why?
Okay, that was
your time. Is she hot? As one of the residents asked me when I was one of the interns asked me when I was a resident, is she hot? And it's like, why are you bothering with this chick? I don't understand, sir. And I'm like, I just seek understanding.
All right. Let's
Because it comes down to neural economy, okay? Because you're asking me to overcome a nervous system that doesn't want to understand. And that's a huge resistor. And it's like, I'm gonna burn, something's gonna get burned. Because it's gonna require toast. So I'm gonna turn the heat, the voltage has to be high, and somebody's likely to get moral outrage.
Well, we know we can reach a 16-year-old boy.
It's like the
We've done it.
14-year-old boy is an eighth grade boy. We can make him understand us.
Right. Okay. We can't make a college age girl understand it, but we can
I
make
don't think that that's reasonable. It's like she's been in the wrong toaster. She's already baked.
This is I'm being crushed again. That's so painful.
Kurt.
That's so painful.
Wait, everybody, just I want you to look. I'm gonna get you a little white flag, yeah, because it's like, oh, surrender, man. It's like, oh, stop, you guys, it's hurting me. I can't take it anymore.
You're fucking killing me. You're killing me. Oh shit. All right,
Sorry,
so
ooh, that was just for the audience. It wasn't to be any offensive. It's just yucking around.
I know your brain. I know what you're doing. so God damn it. Now my whole head is confused. All right. So we know we can reach a 16-year-old kid because we have.
Yeah.
Right. As a matter of fact, they're probably the easiest to reach because they're hungriest for the information.
Just tell me the truth so I can get on with this.
Yeah, it just they just want to know it. So okay, so what you're saying is if they've been through the indoctrination process,
they're emotionally biased to intuitive gratification in the wrong direction, they are not going to want to even hear you.
Okay, so who can we reach? In other words, what's the minimum life experience then?
I don't. It comes down to how baked they are into stupid, which is how non-reality oriented are they, and then how long have they been baking in the non-reality, which will cause them to have a resistance reaction as opposed to a listening reaction.
So you're really talking about some percentage of educated white women, and everybody else is reachable. Or most everybody else.
I'd say much more likely to be reached. The more educated female is the least likely to be reached if she's predisposed to.
If she's not educated, she's indoctrinated.
I apologize.
No, I'm just clarifying.
That's my ambiguity.
So there's a great video going out right now of some girl with a PhD talking about how smart she is and how dumb this other guy is because of what he's not, the way he's approaching a particular problem. And then they sort people by their IQ. And of course, he's the smartest and she's the dumbest, right? And so you're like, the educational degree does not mirror intelligence whatsoever, right? You can't tell. You may be able to tell someone's intelligence even though they have a degree or not, right? And there is some degrees, higher mathematics, though it's getting bad in math too. I mean, you see a lot of math, they really don't understand math. Right? So, and you certainly see it in physics, right? You see the women in physics, their storytelling. So it doesn't mean all of them. I mean, it's really interesting to watch women interviewed at NASA because they're in an environment where they're surrounded by pretty strong empiricism.
Yeah.
And they just sort of smile and smirk like, I'm not playing that game. Right? Just fun. It's humorous to me. And the women, you can tell by their facial expression, they're not trying to please you. They're just trying to understand you. I mean, you can all watch their behavior. It's fascinating.
Okay.
So there's places where we have women like that, of course. And of course, if women engineers are like, please God, can we have more of these? Because as far as I can tell, engineering makes you the least stupid of any profession.
It fries it away.
You just can't, because it's too.
You can't do it and be it.
It's the intersection of liability, science, and practice, right? I mean, you've got liability, science, and practice, and so you have. It's sort of like the military. There's not a lot of
there's no room for a bunch
fungibility
of
there.
fakery.
Yeah. Anyway, so what I was trying to get at is, okay, now that you've broken my heart on yet another,
Sorry, Kurt.
what about the story after the constitutional law? Is there anything? I mean, that seems to be the lowest level we need to bring about. In other words, after that, we're just into policy, right?
Well,
I mean, is that the lowest level story we have to tell? Is there a story?
The lowest level story, because it is English common law, restricted to misbehavior of the feminine thinking.
Right.
And it failed to be incorporated into the Constitution because they didn't imagine that is ever going to happen. It never even crossed their mind. So they didn't write it down. And then after 1776 or 1781, whatever number you want to call it, that's when the introjection began in earnest.
Yes.
With the French Revolution, and then going into the Industrial Revolution, the introduction of Marx, and then the
okay, I know what it is. That's what it is. Okay, so you got it. You got me there. So what it is that there's never an end to just like there's never an end to trifunctionalism.
okay,
There's never an end to masculine female exploration and the discovery of the
opportunities.
of opportunities for reciprocity within it.
Right.
That's
so what happened
that's
was
different from saying women are always wrong, right? That's a very
no, right. No, but it's like this. There's a mistake. The females made a mistake. The feminine cognition made a mistake. They just sensed an opportunity and it was not reciprocal, and they took advantage of it.
Right, because they can't imagine.
They can't imagine why wouldn't you agree to allow me to do whatever I want to do?
Avoid because that's their thing, is avoid responsibility and
it's not my responsibility. You didn't draw a line.
Well, they feel good by charity, but they're giving away men's assets.
Well, why did you wanted that?
Yeah.
But they didn't sense it as they're being bad. They sense it as an opportunity to express themselves as they felt was the appropriate way to act.
Right. They believe they were doing the moral thing. They perceive infantilization as defensive, right? Rather than and you see this in the maturity of some mothers too. Some mothers never give up on infantilization because it's their means of control, and that's their means of value. Some mothers are trying to get you out of the fucking house, right? So that you're self-reliant. That's my family's trick, right? But some mothers aren't.
For your ass.
Yeah, that's the absolute nuclear family tradition. Is my job is to get you out of my fucking house at 18, and so that you be self-sufficient. That's not the nuclear family's objective, and it's not the traditional family's objective, which is and it's not the STEM family's objective, which is the paternal version of it. Right? The traditional is we try to keep our generations together to keep in-group insurance. The absolute nuclear family is like, if I have to insure you, we both failed. Right? I mean, it's pretty extreme demand for responsibility. Whereas in the STEM, well, you have I shouldn't use that term. I should use the traditional family that's patriarchally managed, right? And the difference here is it's like father gives assets to for sons who continue the paternal tradition, and so it's like you're running you're running your family as a state. You're the traditional family, you're running your family within a state. The nuclear family is you're running your family within a market, and the absolute nuclear family is you are each a state, right? So you're this whole that's the aristocratic hierarchy, right? And then you have the feminine egalitarian, which is that we're not responsible for anything except the family. That's our kids. That's all. There's no responsibility for state or whatever. That's why I say that the problem with our perception of the Middle East is it's masculine. It's not. It's feminine. It's a feminine degree of responsibility, not a masculine. It's just that it uses the feminine means of antisocial behavior and aggression, and incorporates the masculine. But even as the masculine, is it organized warfare or is it undermining? It's undermining. What?
It goes to Islam is right about women.
Oh Jesus! Yes. Okay.
Oh my, hanging out with Kurt.
I thought I was the one that's supposed to say off-color things to get you to react. How role reversal keeps happening?
Oh my God, it's the training. It works. The coffee, it's strong.
All right. So is there not a higher degree of resolution than the
law?
higher degree than the law? The issue is that this, in other words, we're pointing out the problem by the time we get the constitutional law, but we haven't pointed out that the equilibration is. It doesn't mean there isn't a new thing that the females will add that will be good. That won't be good, right?
That's correct. No, that was never suggested.
Right. So you could say, well, we could add this kind of care, but we could also guard a male version. Yeah, but we got to guard against infantilization. So how can we produce care that results in responsibility rather than care?
Well, that's the female's job to create that process.
Well, I mean, I don't think they can. I think
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But it's like the issue is we have to prevent their misbehavior with the law as an evolutionary necessity.
Correct. And I see what you see. You're correct at the point you're trying to make, which is the law is just the science of what to do. It provides decidability. What I'm saying is that it's possible to have a political system where the males and females conduct a trade to bring about this form of insurance. Right.
They'll figure it out.
Right. The males and females can figure this out.
But we have to eliminate the potential for negative responses.
Especially when they're going to be more unified in their pursuit of irresponsibility than the men are going to be in their pursuit of responsibility. In other words, this is a problem, given how many women there are, how they diverge less than men, and how men are across the spectrum.
But the issue is once we prohibit misbehavior, all that's left is positively good behavior, and randomly the energy will associate them together in such a fashion that will come up with combinations that will perhaps solve the problem.
Yeah, so again, the two sides of this are the legal, which is the rules, and the political, which is the market. And so what we're trying to do is establish rules that limit us to markets, right, rather than impositions. And given women how they are, they're never going to stop being hypergamic, hyperconsumptions of whatever nonsense that
that makes them just what they are, which is wonderful women.
Which is wonderful for within their domain of competency. Meanwhile, do you want if you look at male versus female nesting, whether it's home environment production, I mean, women are pretty fucking awesome. Right? If you look at the patience you have to have with raising children, If you look at where women are breaking down today, it's because they don't have younger siblings that they're responsible for learning how to mother, right? And they're not having children young enough while they're still in their neurologically adaptive stage. And so since they're not doing that, what's happening is that the female spectrum bias is manifesting and evolving, expressing. Manifesting as expressing, not as woo. Okay, so because there are girls that manifesting is a woo thing, right? But I mean it as being expressed. As there's some girls who just are like opting out of motherhood altogether because they've passed their adaptive range.
Right.
They've become profoundly selfish. And we have some that are maximizing their consumption.
Which is profoundly selfish. Which sounds like solipsism.
Well, that's what they are, right? They're solipsistic. A woman is solipsistic. Now, the problem, the thing I've gotten out of this that's been extremely mind-altering for me is how pro-social male behavior is.
I know it's like and sentimental and all the things that they're not supposed to be. It's like, yeah, I get it.
You know, it's just funny to me that the women are the destructive force.
I know because they falsely believe themselves to be the opposite.
Well, it's like everything else. Men might compartmentalize ideas, but women compartmentalize existence into their own little, frame. Which you can see this in. I love to promote Haidt's work, Jonathan Haidt's work, because you have this wonderful evidence that is broken down into first principles that are reducible to. Despite his fluffy psychological language, I can convert that into property rights, which is what I did. And then for property rights, you can perform it into sex differences and reproductive strategy, given the demand for property. So I just took his work, which was fluffy psychology, and scienced it, right? But he wasn't. But his work is empirical enough, and it took advantage of the self-reporting ability of the internet age, which is one of the innovations. Another example of why the internet has helped us, because his self-reporting turned out to be more valuable than
more like demonstrated interest.
He was more successful in collecting demonstrating bias than previous generations, because he could use the internet. Anyway, so like Haidt comes out as women are specialists. They just care about a few things. Or and so are liberals. Libertarians care about more things. And conservatives, we care about everything. Like conservatives are the adults, right? They care about everything. So everything's about the same. All these moral things are about the same. Well, so we have this, and so women, you got to think about it. Males have conceptual compartments, so they can deal with everything. Women have one fucking drawer, which is harm care. Or liberals. They have one fucking drawer. And everything is related to that one drawer. So they're specialists in a thing, not generalists in a thing. Yet men tend to develop skills in a drawer, making them specialists in a thing, but generalists in general. Or women develop generalists in a domain, but not specialization in anything else other than harm care. It's so fucking good. And I'm like, I'll show you how the brain's organized to do that. Right? I mean, it's good to organize to do that because it's pretty obvious what the brain does, how the brain is organized. So it makes obvious sense. And of course, because males and females share an admixture of genetic material, that expression is going to vary from 20 to 40%, right? Overlap, right? And we're going to have a 60% not overlap, right? So that's why we get to make generalizations about male and female, is that we can see the causal origin of these things, even if some guys are very right. They're very feminine in their expression. Some women, very few, are very masculine. Thank you, God, for giving us, what's her name?
Camille
Neil Paglia.
Paglia.
I mean, Jesus, I mean,
I think she had 8 brothers. Is
well, I mean,
how
it's
she
just saying,
explained it.
Pearl has said the same thing. I have 4 brothers, right? I mean, and this is my argument why I understand women easier than men, is I didn't get next to my cousins until I was in high school, and I was surrounded by all these fucking women all the time. So they actually make perfect sense to me. Or I get them. They're obvious. They're just, it's just the whole thing of realizing that they're evil, right?
It's disturbing to you,
It's disturbing to me.
having grown up among spiders.
Whereas, man, you think the men of all these bad things because we're powerful,
Right.
the way we do it. But realistically, that civilization is built by men, so they can earn they can earn women.
Earn the affections of women.
That's it. I mean, but we're the ones that build everything, and they're so fucking selfish. And it's funny to me, guys aren't selfish. I mean, right? They may appear selfish to women, and there are narcissists.
They are, because they're not giving it to the women's interests.
Right. I mean, so it's just funny to me that male behavior turns out to be the pro-social behavior, right? Or at least pro-socioeconomic political, whereas female behavior might be pro-familial and pro-social.
Yeah.
Right. But it just
At a smaller scale. It's the
right.
social at a smaller scale.
Right. So which is what everything they do, right? It's in smaller scale in shorter time versus male larger scale over longer time. And that's how our brains are organized. So, it's so simple that, you and I have done this now for quite a while together, but
Right.
If I keep asking you the question of how hard is that journey? And can you remember what it was like to think previously?
No.
And so, because that's what I want to capture as a story I could tell guys, and everybody says the same thing. I can't remember how I used to think.
It was disorganized.
It was a long way of fucking getting here, right? And so I don't know how to tell people what the journey's like other than just do it and stick with it.
The issue is, and I think these conversations are very helpful because it's like reiteration with the theme and the factual nature of it will become evident.
Right.
And you just stick with it and your brain will soak it in. It's just a matter of hitting the waypoints and recognizing it's Markov chains, right? It's like, here's how this avenue works, right? Which is how I saw the brain looking at Europe.
Yes. But see, your ability to do that at such scale now, I mean, that's fucking, right? That's the whole thing, is that we see
Pattern recognition
against all scales, from the subatomic to the macro behavioral, right?
But it takes you gotta go through the Markov chains at all the scales a variety of times, and then you can start seeing the patterns.
Right.
It's like, this is the same pattern. It looks the same, right? Because it's ridiculous, because you saw it in a minute once I pointed it out, because I saw it in about the same time frame, and it's like, Kurt, check that out, and it's like, whoa.
That's right. Well, because we're training ourselves to see scale independent patterns, right? It's like when I tell people I know how the universe, I'm pretty sure I'm right how the universe is constructed, because you see the patterns the same across. So the subatomic world, I'd have to falsify that consistency before I looked at anything more absurd, right? And so because the tendency of people is to come up with something absurd because they don't see the pattern. So when I look at the structure of the universe, I'm pretty sure I can say, here's the path, because as far as I can tell, look at lightning, right? And look at the subatomic particles. And what's the fucking difference? Well, the lightning can discharge into the ground, but it can't discharge back into the quantum background because there's no.
It would have done it. It's damn. There's no room here.
So So when you look at this idea of wave particle, I'm like, you're getting confused. Your perception of a particle is when there's a discharge into the ground, right? And your perception of a wave is just where is the lightning most likely at this given point of time, given that the background is always invariant. I mean, always variant, right? That can only be probabilistic because you can't figure out what lightning is going to be either, right? I mean, you can sort of say it's going to be in this area, but you don't know where it's going to actually
That's right.
discharge because the fucking complexities, insane. Well, you think the lightning's hard or the weather's hard? Look at the quantum background. My brain fries whenever I think. I mean, try to model it. I mean, and I'm not a chump either, right? I mean, if it can be modeled, I probably could get there. And god damn, I look at the quantum background. I'm like, it's like trying to think like a woman. I could do it for a half a second, and I want to.
I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
So anyway,
Oh,
I missed the other. I had two insights that I wanted to get at. Yours was about learning that whole spectrum and how you do it, the patterns that we see. I knew it. So I have two topics. If I go down this fundamentals thing, I'm going to lose my second topic. And I lost it, of course. And it had to do with what continuing your
it's Markov chains. And we're finding the way to, through all scales and recognizing patterns that exist in all scales from physical to social.
But other than ternaryism, that's it. Or you have to learn ternaryism at every fucking scale of stable relations.
That's right. You just have to see it's not so much to learn it at every scale, but to recognize its operations at every scale.
And so I mentioned okay, so this is what it was. So I mentioned the absurdity, the whole thing. So I used to think my insights were testimony, truth, right? The grammars, testimony, reciprocity, demonstrated interest, right? The grammars being profound, right? Being profound. And ternaryism, right? Evolutionary computation. I used to think those are my 5 primary insights. What I didn't realize is that the importance of breaking equalitarianism and universalism into sex differences and testing them by seeing the mirror image of them in responsibility as the way to test all behavioral theory. Right? I mean, I didn't see that as essential an insight as truth, reciprocity, demonstrated.
Well, that's the thing that ties it all together.
Correct. I just didn't.
Well, that's because that's a hard one.
Well, if you look at the theory of history, the evolution of theory throughout history, it's the biggest outlier because it's the most variation from our perception of logic, which is right. It's the greatest ternaryism we can sort of see as science, right? But the idea that you have to start with sex differences and
that one is a very unintuitive.
That's not intuitive at all, and I don't really think that until we did the sex differences in lying and said, "Holy shit, male systematizing is just the dominant expression of lying because it's the most advanced technology, just like prohibition of male criminality was the most advanced technology." But if we look at how females lie, it's the mirror inverse.
They're so sneaky.
They're so fucking sneaky. Well, I mean, but we only say that as sneaky because we've normalized sophistry as pseudoscience. Right? We've normalized this shit as right?
That's how they do it.
Right, it's just, but then you look at women, you're like, oh fuck, they do the exact same thing by emotional consistency instead of logical consistency. That insight to me was like, it's like a lot of the things we do or I do. It sits in the back of my head and says, there's something not right here. There's something
Wait,
else
so it's stewing in the ethers until
Yes.
it has enough pressure to bubble out. It
to
can't get
bubble
back
out, and it's
in.
like, oh fuck, this is like as primary an insight as the grammars, right?
Yes.
Which is just that there's one grammar, continuous recursive individuation. And it's just as insight as there's ternaryism. What is ternaryism? Evolutionary computation. What's evolutionary computation? Continuous recursive disambiguation. What's continuous recursive disambiguation? Defeat of entropy by the discovery of negative entropy. Right? I mean, it's just, you sort of go into this, it's like, well, why do we need reciprocity? Because the difference between, this is the fucking thing that gets me. How can I look back and I'm like, how did I miss this? Well, why is reciprocity necessary? Because the only reason we think differently is, and we need reciprocity because of sex differences, cognition, and the distribution that results. Right? I mean, it's just, and it's all these patterns. They're not too, I don't think there are many patterns left.
Well,
We cover
we're looking for like aberrations in the matrix, right?
Yes.
And we're like looking for patterns that we have yet to detect, so they're becoming increasingly subtle.
Yes. But that one, I never envisioned sex differences as the foundation upon which all this social science sits, becoming so central to the work. It is completely, because even the man systematizing logic thing is that you're just wrong if you're not this way.
Right. But the men would say that you're just wrong.
Yes.
And in fact, you're really just women. And that's not the same. I know it's hard for men to accept. The women aren't just wrong, they're just women. And that right there is ridiculous. Because it is. It's like the logical, rational creature has to go, the woman is wrong. And it's no, she's just a woman. That's right. She processes information differently, sir.
Well, I mean, you look at a child,
yeah,
and they promise, right? And you look at someone from a lower class, which means they have lower abilities, and you look at a woman, you don't realize their job is to bridge.
They're to process information in the way they do.
Is it necessary?
Right? They can't do it any other way.
Well, excuse me. They might be able to do it another way, but later, evolution couldn't have created us. In other words,
without the difference,
we couldn't. We couldn't be here, and society couldn't have evolved if women didn't do that, right? Because you can't. We'd have to wish we were as rational and smart as in our past as we are now, but that's not what happened. This reason evolves out of necessity as the size of our brains get bigger and cooperation becomes more valuable. So like, well, of course they're like that. Well, the problem is you don't want us now you can't go and throw the baby out of the bathwater. Well, it's different. Well, in this case, you're just being a woman, right? But it's in this case, right? And explaining it to her, you're just being a woman, right?
Are you mansplaining?
Well, but that's what mansplaining is. But we don't understand. Women-splaining is exactly the same that women do women-splaining.
Yes.
Right. And so when they slap you on the head and tell you to think about this and that and the other thing, that's women-splaining. You notice how crazy women-splaining is, and how it's just you realize we both do it. Right.
Of course. We have to, because we can't think of anything else to do.
It's fucking obvious. Right?
Well, you're the great apologist.
Well, I mean,
you're like this. It's like it's not their fault. It turns out you're the least blaming of all of us, Kurt.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like the most understanding. It's just a bot. Come on, calm down.
I get this all the time because I'm just understanding. Like you're right on the conspiracy shit, right? But I'm understanding. They're right about women. Well, but I'm understanding, right? I mean, the Jews are that, yeah, but I'm understanding, right? I mean, I get this. Well, I'm understanding thing. Well, that's my job, right?
Which is the unnamed profession, to be honest with you.
It's not my job is to be judicial, right? I have to weigh both sides, but we've developed a system of weighing both sides now. The problem is that one little fucking thing there which is the male sexual division of temporal labor, turns out to be the foundation
Central.
on which everything else rests, and it's fucking exasperating.
Oh my. Is it tiresome?
Well, I mean, it's tiresome in that look how much knowledge you've got to be able to do to get to the point where we can make this and not be morally outraged. You know what I mean? We could just
I don't know
say,
that we have demonstrated that yet.
okay, well, okay. Where you can understand that the other person's a bot,
Yeah,
right? Or
we
a
can
child.
understand, but can they understand us is the question.
That's well, I mean, the issue is why do we evade the responsibility of limiting them? So it's our fault. In other words,
We take responsibility.
we're not taking responsibility for limiting them. Well, the answer is we took responsibility for parenting them into equality and an aristocracy of everyone. Well, we were wrong. We have to go back to taking responsibility for making sure everyone takes responsibility.
No, we weren't wrong. We just made some errors.
Well, okay.
We didn't calculate correctly because we didn't think about how crazy they are. Right? How womanly they're going to be. It's like we thought you were going to behave like behaved women, but damn, I'm like, whoa, this went sideways. It only took 100 years to figure it out.
But when women were responsible for children, the home economy, right? They learned the domestic economy, like men learned the political and economic economy.
Yeah.
And so we had a means of driving people, at least men and women, to relatively equal competency. I mean, in my house, my wife paid the bills. I'm the last, as you guys know, I'm the last person you want to remember I need to do this on the 15th, right? It's, I might remember 3 months from now that I should have done it on the 15th. That's, I would tell people that one of the benefits of wealth was I would pay all my bills quarterly, and most of them in advance, because that way I was
harder to screw up.
It's hard to screw up quarterly because that's about the cycle I can keep track of things.
Okay. You're operating at that wavelength.
So I would buy 3 months of cable, 3 months of cell phone, and 3 months of internet.
Right. That's how responsible you can be.
That's the limit. If I've got to do something every month, I can't remember if it was yesterday or 5 weeks ago, or not how I work. But the point is, we're not all the same. If you look at how many women still run.
But so this would be the error. The error was made when they allowed the women to be interjected into the polity. We did not have the low level of responsibility of women that we have now afforded in our civilization.
Right. We let women into economy and polity without giving bias to demonstrated responsibility by organizing a family, which is the first unit system of production. Right. One man, one vote, one family. This is property, one man, one family. This is the same thing.
Yes.
What you're saying is because under manorialism, that family had to operate that way. Right. And that's you couldn't get land, the farm of your own. Nobody would rent you land unless you could demonstrate the man and woman were a power couple, which is where the absolute nuclear family emerges, is under power couples. Well, what's a power couple? Men and women who can take equal adult responsibility for things. So the problem is we went from demonstrated responsibility to taxation. In other words, we said we want to justify taxation, which is why they included women. Remember, the workforce, we're taxing them; they got to have a say, right? But that was the actual justification that was
right.
But the reality is that it doesn't matter. Taxing is just paying for services that you're getting, as long as that's what taxes consist of. Don't let any libertarians jump on them. I mean,
right.
Since I mean it.
They're already gearing up. I can hear them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, services rendered is different from involuntary services, unwanted, that aren't services They're parasitisms,
Right.
right? There's a difference. But when
You
you're
understand that.
when you're a woman and you've got 3 kids, and you've got to run the household economy, which is where the word economy comes from. It's running the household, right? The finances of the household. If you've got a woman that can do that, she's demonstrably competent, right? So what's the difference for males and females? Scale. I've got to run my business.
Right.
Right? And so, but if you look at European history, men could go to war and women could manage the house just fine. Because our women were competent because they had those responsibilities. Now, if you go to other civilizations, did they have that? Not very often, but not on the scale of the Greeks or the Romans or the Europeans. So that's why our women in history have had greater autonomy than other civilizations, is because they had greater fucking responsibility. Why? Because in the absence of a standing army paid for by a state who can cheaply extract revenues from a river, from the organization of a river valley, you need to rely on men who can be pulled out of the farm, basically a militia, to fight, right?
Oh,
the women manage the goddamn farm.
so now you're back to accidents of geography.
Exactly. Right. And so,
isn't that beautiful? It was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love it because you can do it now, and like, look how easy you do it, right? I mean, right? I mean, you contribute.
It's just familiarity with the terrain,
right?
Which comes through time and service.
Yes. So why don't our whole thing is we're generating women that don't have responsibility for an economy, right? And so they're just maximizing into what's better for them.
They're turning themselves into tax slaves, just like a lot of the men are.
Yes. So it's just fucking frustrating. It's just fucking frustrating.
No.
Okay, go ahead. Go. That's my being
charitable. It's not frustrating. It's you see, you're like this. Frustrating suggests defeatism. Okay? It's just challenging.
Challenging. Okay. Well, I meant
what it does is it suggests we have work to do here, and we need to get on with it. And frustrating is you're looking at the inertial wall that you have to climb, and you don't want to.
We're just saying we're looking for men who are responsible, who are willing to bear
for people to take responsibility
for the polity. Yeah.
And it's like what we have to do. The challenge here is to generate responsibility.
I mean, why do you say you're sovereign and you have all these rights if you're not responsible? Which is the whole fucking point.
You are. Either that or you're lying.
Back to my argument against Christians, and they're hiding behind Jesus instead of showing up to fight. Jesus will save us. God will save us.
Okay, I get you. See, I'm studying this. This is like a long-term project of mine, studying this objection, because I'm understanding it, because it's like there's a universalism of Christianity that is avoiding responsibility because Jesus covered it, and it's like, okay, that's not going to cut it, because it's like you have to be like a Catholic militant, and then you're on base,
right?
Which is to say, I was like this. I'm organizing the local fellows to take care of business locally, and I'm like the Hillary Clinton said it well. We're stronger together, and the symbol that comes to my mind is a fascia. That's the organizing principle. And it's like, what?
You just gave me a brilliant idea. Go ahead.
Of course I did. Thank you. So it's just fascia, because we're stronger together, and we work together, and we take responsibility for ourselves and for each other.
So is the reason we're failing is we're not restoring trifunctionalism. Wait a minute. By saying the faith militant is responsible for this. The judge
The judicial, the church militant, the judge militant,
Yes,
and the I want to say something other than nation militant, which is the military
yeah,
militant. We all have a responsibility for our domains.
that's
And
right.
the natural law is just the contract for the preservation of our ability to be masters of those domains in defense of one another. That's the problem. They didn't have a story before for how to unite the right, and that's actually the answer. It's not behind one, it's behind them all.
3.
Right. That's right. So it's a faith militant, the judge militant, and the
State.
state militant. We have to have all three of those, and they have to know that they are responsible for that. They don't
Domains.
they don't have to be responsible for the others.
Limited domain responsibility.
Right, and it's the cooperation between these responsibilities under the law of all. In other words, under, you call it God's law, law of science, law of under the natural law, there's just the scientific decidability, so that every group maintains its.
So limited scope of responsibility.
Well, I don't know why.
So the Christian appears to be avoiding responsibility to a state militant.
Well, that's the thing.
Not. He's
No.
not.
The what I always said is, I'm a judge. I'm loyal to Christians. Right? I do not have to be other than loyal.
Right.
Right? I am loyal to the ethno-nationalists. Right? I don't necessarily, right? I mean, or the state makers, which is state is an organization that uses force to maintain the capital organization of a nation, which is a people. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm loyal to them. I can't do that. I mean, my loyalty is to our people
Yep.
as a judge. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And
So
so
domain limitation.
I don't have anything to say about anything than irreciprocity and defection, which is defection, right? I mean, it's not my job to get involved in the church unless the church, the faith,
defecting.
is defecting. It's not my job to get involved in the what I would think of as the military state, the militia, the military, unless they're overstepping into irreciprocity. And I would say the same thing. It's not my job to get involved in commerce, which is the center, the markets, unless they're
To interfere
interfering.
unless they're being irreciprocal.
So I view the judge's job as, I can never think of where the judge. My instinct is put the judge at the top of the pyramid rather than the center, and that's probably wrong. As the pyramid should probably be commerce or trade, faith and state, and the judge is just trying to make sure everything stays in
balance in the middle.
Balance in the middle. So I should probably. I know that the charts look like that, but I sometimes make the mistake of confuse because reciprocity emerges from trade, that they're the same thing, and they're really not. Because you have to govern trade, just like, which is something we do pretty often, and just like you do the state, you have to limit trade just as you have to limit the state and limit the faith.
I like it with the balance in the middle.
So I thought that was actually pretty.
What's that?
That answers a question that we've. It puts us. The argument is are we central now? I would argue that that's the central proposition rather than the right proposition. Because the left proposition is all crime, right? I mean, they are. It's all criminal, right? But so you're big on saying I talk about the diamond and you talk about I talk about the triangle, but you talk about the diamond because here we got the evil folks down there and they're
Gotta count them in.
we gotta count them in, and I'm like, well, I only think about the good stuff, but maybe that's
That's Kurt's in his goo eyes.
Kurt being
Stop it. Stop it. It's childish.
childish by understanding optimism, by charitable interpretation.
You're just neglecting the shadow half,
Like,
man.
I know how this little conversation is going to spread like fucking wildfire. Where Kurt, it's just going to turn out Kurt, you're being a nice guy.
I'm gonna turn into something I don't know what I'm turning into. I'm gonna be diabolical.
I just find it interesting that I end up being the nice guy.
Here's Kurt. You gotta be kidding me. I thought I was the bad guy.
Exactly. So weird. So that's two pretty, or it's more than two pretty good insights we've had today. Three was the brain. One was the brain
I'm not
thing.
trying for more.
Well, wait a minute. One was the brain thing. One was the foundation of sex differences being such a novel innovation that's counterintuitive.
The brain thing is, there's a name for this that I have made up, and it's in my notebook now. See,
Don't let me
I
forget.
just underlined it. It's the Great Gyre.
That's great.
That's all it is, because it's like this. It's reiterated in
Yeah.
that European, African, Asian, European
It's true.
Great
So-
Gyre.
So
Developmental gyre, right?
and then the third is that we're not supposed to have one of us in charge. We need to have all of us, all three of us in charge, and we need to know our responsibilities. And then that's how we get away from factionalism.
That's the important thing.
If we could
It's to
just
not, they said that's, I think that the key function that's occurring now is uniting the factions.
well, I mean, you and Brandon are seeing the same thing, which is the Overton windows in a place now where we're driving people toward a climatic event, and it's causing demand for action, and it's winnowing away all the silly ideas,
Yes.
right? Which is logical.
Yep. There's no room for the silly.
I have to check something. Hold on a second. Messages. This one. To make sure I'm okay here. Okay, I have until 13. I have an hour. Okay, I thought I was coming up on another thing. And I'm not. I got another hour. Okay. Well, that was a pretty fruitful discussion.
I enjoyed it. You got a plan for tomorrow?
Sorry?
I'm not trying to do better than we've already done.
You want can we be done for the day, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying this. I think I don't want to do better. I'm hoping that I'm asking if you have a plan for tomorrow.
I had a plan for tomorrow, not which is today, which is now tomorrow, but today was so fucking good. I'm glad we did it.
Yes.
Tomorrow is again, I feel really good because I have you and Brandon going on two different things. So we're gonna pick up tomorrow with continuing our consolidation of the book into
So it will be a working job.
be a session, working session tomorrow, where's today's a chat.
Perfect.
All right, love you, man. Thanks for all the hard work you do. Thank you for everything you've done for me and for the group and for the movement. Appreciate it.
Hey, just stop recording, then we'll have a chat.
Okay.